Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jake Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Jake Gunkelman.
Hey, Pete.
Can you guys hurry up and count up your ballots?
It's not as bad as Alaska, which has the ranked choice voting, and they're going to be counting for another week or so. They don't anticipate it to be done until into November, and like way into November 25th or something like that.
That's
So you have to take time to count. I mean, if you don't count the votes, why allow them? So
well, I guess I'm under the impression that you have a barcode and you scan it and you drop it in the box and it's done. But I guess it's not. I don't know. I just
well,
wanted to so we can move on.
in the mail-in ballots, you can mail them the day of as long as they're postmarked, and they may take 4 or 5 days to get there, depending upon where they've been sent from. It's just the postmark. So you vote on a given day, but all the ballots aren't in yet, and it worked so well for me. I got a notification in the email that they were sending it, and if I didn't get it within about 7 days, that I was supposed to call them, and I got it along with the big pamphlet describing all of the measures and all of that, and went through it and marked my sample ballot. And copied it onto my actual ballot carefully, making sure I didn't mark anything outside the lines, and no reason for anybody to reject anything. And sent it in. I got a note that it was in the mail. I got another note that it was received and counted. And I'm not impatient. I politicians come and go. If one of them shows up a little bit later, it's okay with me. So,
Well, I did the same thing, mail-in vote. I guess it's just that Cali, it's all mail-in vote, so there's that much more to delay, I guess.
And we've also got people in there arguing as to whether each
Yeah,
one of them can be counted. So that and they should have the right to examine them and challenge things that are funny, and like as anybody would expect.
yeah,
If something doesn't look right, you're going to squawk about it appropriately, and at that point have it set aside, and it'll be looked at by people from both sides, and eventually they'll either pitch it or count it.
yeah.
And but there's a lot of back and forth, and in California, there's some counties that have more of that and some counties that have less of that. And the more rural counties don't have as big a staffing.
Yeah.
So, but as I say, Alaska, it's going to take longer there than anywhere. Ranked choice voting, you count them all, and then you realize who didn't make it, and then you take their ballots and you count them for their next choice, and then you might actually, if nobody makes it, at that point, the ones who were at the lowest rung of the ladder get pulled off, and their third
Right.
choice gets counted. So the rank order voting ends up being harder to predict, but it does allow for less funded, less well-known candidates to actually have a half a chance. So, and Mary Peltola, I think is how they say it, in Alaska was elected on ranked choice voting, and I think Sarah Palin went pretty upset about that because she thought she was going to win, um, but she didn't, and Alaska went to the courts and argued about ranked choice voting being illegal, and the court said, "What?" you know? So anyway, they're still doing it, ranked choice voting. Uh, I, I I wish them wisdom and luck because it's never easy, um, and I think Mary Potola actually did a good job representing Native Alaskans, where that she's from Native Alaskan. She's not an Anglo. Uh, so anyway, got to let people vote.
Well, talking about politics here, locally, if you get involved, you have a much greater influence than you do nationally. Nationally, everybody talks about it and can get all pissy and moany, but
Yeah,
you know,
the only real politics is local,
yeah.
and a lot of that is nonpartisan. City council. That's not Republican and Democrat. That's city council.
Well,
They don't go in necessarily touting their politics as much as their credentials and
yeah.
who they know and what issues are their focus and so forth. And we just voted here in Sassoon for a 1.75 sales tax to replace the 1 cent sales tax. So three-quarters of a penny more per sale, which will raise about 3 million for the city, which is good because we've got a structural deficit. Police and fire retirement funds and whatnot that are expensive. But what are you going to do? Not have police and fire? you
No.
know? so, um,
First responders,
you,
number one.
what's that?
First responders, always number one. You got to take care of.
Yeah. If you don't have that, you don't have anything in a city.
How
You know,
how many
it,
how many you got in Susan?
about 29,000
Okay.
approximate, maybe a handful more, but it's a small town. It's surrounded by Fairfield, which is about 150. So we're kind of well, we were here first. We're one of the 50 oldest cities in the U.S. And it was here a long time ago as a spot where your Central Valley grain could get on a ship here and go from Sassoon out into the bay and actually have some trade.
Yeah.
So it goes back a long ways, and um, yeah, uh, they may have straightened out the channel a little bit here to come into the turning bay, but other than that, it's just a little circuitous, waterway. Uh,
Well,
anyway, I'm happy with the little town. They treat us fairly well here. They have a lot of little parks and they have baseball. The San Francisco Giants have a little itty bitty kid farm league thing going here. Um, they have soccer fields. The soccer field is actually so close to sea level that it tends to get a little bit mushy.
mhm.
So they're putting in an underlayment and then putting on artificial turf. They had to go through all sorts of
Do you have to do a
engineering in
referendum
order to
on
get
that?
that. What's that?
Do you have to do a referendum? We have 20,000 where we live, and we had to put in some turf, and it cost us a little chunk of change. I wonder, did they include that in your taxes or?
No, they pulled that out of the general fund and funded it, but we've got a couple major construction things going on. Transportation center on the periphery of the town, close to the Air Force Base, on some territory that wouldn't really allow like homes to be built. They're uh, the flight paths, the end of the flight path. They don't want like homes there. It's okay if they crash your building. but it can't be a home, you know. Um, so, but this big transportation center was proposed, and I looked at it. Their EIR was reasonably well done. I had pointed out to them that with 2 million square feet as a warehouse, you're going to change the amount of water falling on the ground. It's going to end up running off of the roof and onto the ground somewhere. But all that water has to penetrate, not run off, or you're going to have a neighbor that's real upset. So they actually put in some catchment basins based on my comments, and they'll drill down through and put gravel so that water can percolate down to groundwater. And anyway, they were responsive to the EIR process. You make a comment, they have to respond, and instead of just telling me to blow off, which is, you know, just as it's an easy thing to say in a process like that, but um, I've done a lot of EIR stuff. I think they didn't want to mess with me, and they actually went ahead and put these percolation ponds in their parking areas and stuff. So
Well, for the people that haven't listened to us before, your advocation is the environment. And did I say that right?
my avocation, yes.
Yeah, advocation. Okay. And we're just getting over, those political times, whatever side you're on. And I'm involved in local politics. You're involved in local politics. One of the things that has come up is there's a section of town, there's a dead spot of cell service, Jay, and you just can't get any cell service. And uh, a group of people, let's just say they're in a certain ward. Um, if we put a cell tower there, it can correct it, get cell service, plus make cell service better for everybody else in town, but
Yeah.
not in my backyard, Jay. So,
Well, of course, not in your backyard, you know, uh, the remember 2G? I don't even think they called it G.
oh, you're
um,
OG.
3G,
Old
4G is
Gunkelman.
like old school, but those used a 6 millimeter wavelength, and they were actually tested on health impacts because there were people that were worried about it.
Yeah.
And National Toxic Center or something such as that did the big study in 2018, and there were previous studies that looked at, oh, you live close to a cell tower and you live far from a cell tower, and they compare the two, but there were no doses identified. It was
I'm going to put a
sloppy.
video right here because I just looked into it, Jay. There's more. Let's just say whatever the meter is that you're talking about, the wavelengths, because I don't want people to tune out. But if you're standing underneath the cell tower, let's just say it's a 5. You put the cell phone next to your head, it's 800.
Yeah, we could talk about that. Self-inflicted is a different thing than involuntary.
Right.
It's your choice to grab the cell phone. It's not your choice to walk by,
Yeah.
and you can't circumvent the tower. And it used to be that the 2, 3, and 4G were a big tower with this 6 millimeter, and um, it's now a 5G. They don't do big towers. They do smaller little repeaters because it's a much stronger and much higher frequency. It's between 30 and 300. So there's a giant intensity change, and it's faster. So you're going to get exposed to more waves. Uh, I don't know that wave count is something that makes a difference. They suggest that it's not going to penetrate the skin as far. Well, I don't know that skin penetration is the thing. That the experiments where you're close to a tower and far from the tower where you
Yeah.
live didn't really pan out to be acceptable science. There was no dosimeter identification of how much dose you got. They were just estimates from how close you lived and so forth. Now, they the National Toxicity Group did a study with rats, and there was a group in Italy that did it with rats and mice, and they basically exposed them to old 4G for basically from conception to death, and then they looked for cancers, and they found in male rats that there was a rare cardiac tumor, a schwannoma, in the heart, and it wasn't in female rats. It was only in male rats. It wasn't in mice, but there were also tumors in the brain and tumors on the adrenals. And that wasn't just male rats. That was across rats and mice. This heart one was just in male rats. And since I'm not a male rat, I'm not so worried about that one, you know. But the brain tumor, adrenal tumors mimic some of the uh, uh, just general 60 hertz Gauss exposure data as well. So if you expose to a high dose of just regular 60 hertz at an intensity, a power lineman,
Yeah.
somebody who works in a substation, somebody who's working with transformers, but that high exposure, they ended up with astrocytomas. This was the power company doing that experiment. They were trying to refute the Swedish study that showed a 400% increase in leukemia in kids. 400% sounds awful, doesn't it? But
No.
it's like super rare. And if it's like five and it's now four times that, it's like 20 people, but it's still a 400% increase. So there's an effect.
Well, I think
Um,
bear with me, Jay, because I have to process in order to understand, and maybe somebody else can listen and hear how I'm taking it. I think the whole key thing is ionization and non-ionization. Ionization, you're
okay.
knocking an electron out. So like a gamma wave, right?
Yeah,
Faster.
yeah, yeah. Like X-rays, X-rays are ionizing radiation. MRI is not. MRI has giant field strength, but there's not an ionizing radiation. They're not shooting little electron bullets at you.
Right,
Not
right.
they're not zinging off a piece of your DNA here and there. So um, and ionizing radiation is the worst kind because that can be a direct problem. I mean, lifetime dose of CT is something that they count up, and there's a reason they count it up. And every CT scan you get, read the report. It's going to say we minimized it by doing. I mean, there's a couple of paragraphs of boilerplate in that report on how they minimized your exposure. Well,
How many can you have a year, Jay?
I wouldn't recommend any if you can avoid them, you know. But if you have to have them,
Yeah.
MRI is preferable to a CT because there's no ionizing radiation. It's more expensive, and it may be harder to get it scheduled. CTs are older technology, basically,
Yeah.
the much more readily available. And if you have a head injury and you need a scan quick, one or the other, uh, you need a scan quick. Quibbling about which one and the possibility of a one-time dose, it's not an issue. Get the scan. They have to figure out if you got a bleed or not, and whether they can how they can treat you without killing you. So it's important for them to figure it out real quick. Uh, uh, but that's not an ongoing dose thing.
Yeah.
There are people that have things that are ongoing dose scans, tracking things progressively and so forth. And for those, MRIs are
But you
preferred because again, it's a one shot deal if it's just a one time scan, but it's lifetime dose.
but you hear gamma bad in our line of work. Gamma, I mean, that's just frequency, the amount of times the amplitude. Am I saying that right? Ups and downs. Is that
Yeah,
right?
waves. Yeah.
Waves. Okay. All right. See, look at this. Spent a few years with you, Jay. I might know something. So and gamma in our line of work, that's like processing power.
Yeah. And as gamma radiation is a different thing. It's a kind of radiation as opposed to a brain frequency. You know, gamma is just a damn letter in the Greek alphabet, and it can be used for different fields for different purposes. And, you know,
But
it's like calling something a type A and type B. Well, type A personality? I mean, or is this category A, category B that's unrelated to personality? I mean, descriptors can be used in different fields for entirely different purposes. It keeps us all confused.
but the universe is all about frequencies. I mean, we're in the frequency business, right? We're just measuring chemical energy and letting the body take the feedback from that energy and correcting ourselves, right?
Well, they do suggest that in the future all medicine will be frequencies, but I think we're a long ways away from there still. So, in
Here,
the tricorder, you know.
Jay,
um,
does a wave actually ever end?
well, ask Fourier. Fourier's assumption is that the wave began at the beginning of time and it goes on till eternity. I think that's a long time. I don't know that I'll last that long. I
Ah.
severely doubt it. And you know, but then I'm not worried about lasting long. I'm just worried about being okay while I'm still here.
Well,
You
it's all
know,
relative, right? So,
yeah.
there's got to be
I can
something
I can
beyond
check
this.
I can check out like that. Just quit taking my meds. I got a couple of days and it's
You've
gone.
been saying that for a few
So,
decades, Jay.
well, when the time comes, I'll have that choice.
Right, right.
It's a quick exit.
But you'll be around forever, and it's like our lifetime is just a blink compared to.
I've had people who were in the documentary video saying that I could die at any time, and they died. So you never know. Surprise, that the end is there for you at some point. Uh, and it's not something to avoid. I've had near-death experiences so often that I'm not at all worried about one side or the other. You know.
I just know you're alive at least twice a week. Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Pacific. Q&A and Thursday, 8 a.m.
I
Pacific.
just I just plug myself in and I'll be fine. So
So in our business and getting back to the cell towers, like a microwave oven, the inside of it, the little metal thing with all the holes in it, that's a Faraday cage, right? That keeps the bad, because microwaves, that heats stuff up. That's not good, right?
that's correct. And the higher the frequency, the more likely you are to end up with something like that. And the 5G has not been tested like the 4G has. They say that it's likely to not be as bad because it's less penetrating and the towers are smaller, but they're closer. And when the proximity to the generator ends up being higher and higher and higher intensity. So we don't really know. Uh, but in life you don't really know anyway. So uh, um, I don't know that it's time to be outraged about it. If you feel like you're a sensitive individual to microwave energy, you should think about finding a spot outside of the cities, out into the countryside somewhere. Um, but it, we're about to have satellite cell communications, and those cell towers are going to be circulating above us instead of being
Right.
plunked on something next to us. And the I think the good thing about that is that you won't have proximity to the tower like we do now. Even with the 4G, you can climb up a tower and stand there and look from ground zero at the emitter, um, and you're not going to be able to do that on a satellite.
Right.
So
Well, do you put any faith in the World Health Organization for studies? because they just recently came out with, hey, we don't see anything with 5G. It's as dangerous as coffee or pickles. Do you put any faith
Hey,
in those guys?
don't mess with the freaking pickles. They're
That's what she said.
they're not at all safe, but damn, they're tasty on a burger, you know. Um, and life is full of hazardous choices, and
Yeah.
what are we gonna do? Not eat? That's hazardous too.
Well,
You know,
it's
so
pick your poison, right? So,
yeah.
so Jay, what would be the
I
physical?
and as far as the World Health Organization's
Yeah,
opinion on something like that, I think there's a lot of political and
yeah,
commercial bias on their positions. The I used to think that the FDA and World Health Organization and things like that were pretty reliable, but having seen heads of departments swapped out like changing shoes or something, and
right.
the style of shoe that got stuck on didn't look like a science person to me. So, when it looks like politics is involving itself with the
Yeah.
science, it's time to step away from that science.
Well, follow the money wherever the money's going. So the power lines, you got the power lines to your right, and you got the cell towers to your left. What is going on with the power lines in the brain?
Well, power lines, if you're dealing with well, first of all, a lot of people look at a pole with a line on it and they think it's a power line. Hell, half of those are phone lines and cables and things. So,
Sure.
you got to know what you're looking at. If they got really tall and they have a T across the top, or maybe two T's across the top, and insulators, that's a power line. And the high voltage, 15 kilovolts or greater, that they do go up. The if you stand underneath one of those, your uh, your little tri-field meter will end up with about 150 milligauss, which is way higher than the 3 milligauss limit that they suggest for safety. Which is one of the reasons that I argued for burying the power lines through town that I lived in, and that cost them an extra $10 million.
Yeah.
But they were forced to do it by the Energy Commission. At the time, there was no standard for it at all, and standing in front of the all-male panel, sitting on the dais, the power companies said, "There's no standards." And the panelists turned to me and said, "Well, what would you propose as a standard?" Uh, you should never ask me something like that. They didn't know how crazy and silly I really am. So, um, having walked around above buried power lines and uh, underneath open power lines, I suggested if you hold the Gauss meter at testicular height, that shouldn't be any more than 3 milligauss. And all of them up there are men, and they all go kind of, ooh, don't toast the noogies. and, uh,
Almost
uh,
all.
and so they didn't know what to do. They said, well, the standard is 3 milligauss at 3 feet. They apparently thought they had long legs. So anyway, there is a standard now. Power lines buried underground,
Yeah.
should be measured at 3 milligauss at 3 feet above, directly above the power lines.
Let's say you got a neurofeedback tech and they just happen to be sitting next to those power lines trying to put on the sensors. What would that do to the EEG?
If you had 150 milligauss, a line directly above you, and you put on electrodes and they were all balanced below 5K plus minus 1K between any single pair, you would have very little 60 hertz in it. An imbalance between, let's say we had one at 1K and one at 5K. The difference when you look between them, you'd see some 60 in it. The balance between them is important for the common mode rejection. And historically, they had 10K ohms, 10,000 ohms of resistance was the standard and below. But they didn't talk much about balance, and you could have 1K and 10K, and you got a lot of interference at that point. So the equivalence of the impedance between electrodes is important. There are filters for 60 hertz, but if your 60 hertz artifact is gigantic, those filters can only do to a certain extent. They're not going to clean out something that's a gigantic artifact. They'll clean up small 60 hertz artifacts very nicely, but or 50 or 60. And there's some companies that have decided that rather than having a narrow filter just for 60 and another one for 50 because your device might be sold in a spot that has 50 or 60.
Yeah.
They'll just take it in from 40 on up. They'll just get rid of it. The problem with that is that above 40 has got some interesting spiky things in it, and you don't want to end up wiping them out. If you don't go at least to 70 hertz on the upper end, you don't really call yourself a medical device. So to meet medical standards, you have to go from below 1 to 70 hertz. Now, researchers go way above 70, 150, 200, 500. The old Nexus, which went belly up, was up to 800 hertz. It was DC to 800.
Well,
So
it hurts.
it was one of the better amps in the field, but I mean, the company has to exist for the amp to keep being made and sold, and that didn't happen. So
Well, live on mind media. So this amplifier, to, in order to have a good amplifier, it has to be able to filter that stuff out, right?
that's correct.
Okay. And what is the difference between general health and wellness and then using an amp to diagnose? Like, what is all the numbers that we just talked about? What is the difference?
A general health and wellness device has not gone through the FDA with the intention of it being a medical device.
So,
So it's specifically not designed for diagnostic purposes.
yeah, what
It's
makes it
okay
designed for
for
that?
it's okay for relaxation. It's okay for meditation. But if you think in terms of I have XYZ disorder, so I'm going to go get a general health and wellness device. Well, I'm afraid that that may not be a good match. The general health and wellness device is not intended for medical application. It's intended for recreation. You know, um, it's a fun device. You can relax, you can excite, you can meditate, you can do all sorts of things. But as soon as you say, "I've got a headache," "I've got ADD," "I've got migraine," I've got depression, I have anxiety, I have if I have something other than I have a desire to meditate, I have a desire to relax, I have a desire for, if you're if you're playing around with stuff, you have every right to play around with your own head. But um, the device you pick, if you're a therapist, ends up being a big change. If you're going to bill for insurance, a general health wellness device will not qualify. You have to have a 510K medical device to qualify to bill insurance.
So the Stens, the old Stens 19 channel, is that a health and wellness or is that a like what I'm trying to figure out is inside the box. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but inside the box, what I bought for 20 grand versus going to the hospital and they want to measure if I'm having a seizure or not. What's difference inside the box?
The Nexus amplifier was not just a general health and wellness, that was a 510K.
That was a 510K.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So, but there are general health and wellness devices out there. Neurooptimal is a general health and wellness device. If you want to put it on your head and it does uh, 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 as they say, it's a nonlinear, dynamical process, and the process fits everybody because it's like stretch pants or something, you know, it fits everybody. Well, quite honestly, a size 42 long doesn't look good on everybody,
Especially me.
I I didn't even want to make an estimate, um, but that you if you have an actual complaint, you should end up having a 510K medical device with a practitioner that realizes the difference. And I have nothing against somebody wanting to sit down and experience feedback. Uh, it's not it's not a problem to experiment with your own system. Um, but at the same time, if you're experimenting with your own system, you're responsible for the outcome. It's not the medical community has expectations for their general health and wellness that's different than the expectation for the medical device.
Jay, one more question. I won't hold you, but if you had to take a guess, an educated guess, because everybody's doing studies, and studies are only good for whoever's paying for them and gets the numbers that they want. But what would you guess with this 5G, 6G? Because it's a slower wave than the gamma, right? What do you think will happen to the body, or in the mentally speaking, if anything? What would be your guess that you would see happening in the future if we get these next generations of antennas?
I'm not so worried about the antennas that are mounted hither and yon as I am about the device that you hold
Hold
up
to you.
against
Okay,
your
got it. Got it.
head or wear on your hip.
Yeah.
Um, you know, at, um, I have a cell phone, which is kind of an emergency cell phone, and it's not, most people don't call me on it. It rings 99% of the time it's Renita calling me for something,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it sits at an arm's length over here. I don't use it very often, um, but when I do, I put on the speaker and I can hear from a foot or two away and speak at it, and it works just fine. Uh, I don't have to stick it up against my head and exponentially increase the dose.
So when I when I go to the dais and people are complaining about, well, mental this, mental that, the big problem is you have more of an issue with that phone in your pocket right now than you do with that tower over there. That would be a fair statement on my part. I would sound halfway intelligent.
You sound more than halfway.
Halfway.
That's an intelligent statement.
Okay.
Um, at the same time, point out the pickles. Point out the pickles.
Copy. Jay Gunkelman. All right, that was an interesting NeuroNoodle neurofeedback podcast. Life is all about wavelengths.
Yes, and again, although Fourier assumes that they go on forever, I know that I won't. So I think the Fourier doesn't match the EEG. Its assumptions are stationarity, the permanence of the sine wave, and that everything's sine waves. If you've looked at much EEG, you see a lot of non-sinusoidal waves, and it assumes no transients. Well, EEG is full of transients. Look at an EEG sometime. It's little things that come and go, transients, and no paroxysms. And in an abnormal EEG, you can get really nasty paroxysms. And it assumes no state changes. Well, for God's sakes, people go drowsy all the time. There's a state change. So the Fourier's assumptions don't match the EEG at all. We should throw out the Fourier and use wavelet analysis, but that's not very commonly done. I've been recommending it for a long time, but then, it's, uh, 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 why would they want to listen to me?
You know what?
um, actually, one one company many years ago now listened to me. Their engineers actually set up a bank of wavelets and tried it, and they said, "Man, this works slick." They thought it was really quite good, and they engineered their device around wavelet analysis instead of Fourier or digital filtering. Most people doing feedback wouldn't use Fourier because it's too slow. You have an epoch that has to fill. Even if you do a sliding window on it, you still have time. It's a time domain thing, and you want to be more reactive than having to average something for 3-4 seconds or something. So Fourier is not used for feedback, but they use FIR and IIR filters, and those are IIR are fast, but they're not that accurate, and FIR are accurate, but they're not that fast. The wavelets are fast and accurate, so why not use them? You know, it it takes a little bit of engineering, but that's the job of the person making the device. The user doesn't generally know, wavelets or FIRs and all that. That's engineering talk, and that's wah 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 wah. They don't even hear it when you speak it. So
Jay, for the next time we get together, I want you to think about this one. If you were a wave, what kind of wave would you be? So it would be a Gunkel wave.
you know, in the lab many years ago,
Yeah.
I started to point out far field phase reversals with people that had strokes. This to have a stroke on one hemisphere and to be an out of phase frontoparietal, and it was up in one spot, nothing in between, and down in another spot, a far field phase reversal. And the first time I showed it to one of the doctors, he said, that's nothing. Some movement artifact, some trash. I showed him another one, and then another one, and then another one. And then he started to see them. Oh, there's one of those Gunkel waves. And I just absolutely was, it's my pet peeve, people sticking names on things. I don't like that.
Unless it's yours.
Wernicke stuck a name over on here. If you have a name like Wernicke, what are you sticking it on things for? It's like Gunkelman. I mean, why would you put that on something?
But you call it a Gunkel wave. You send me a picture what that looks like.
Oh, thanks anyway, but no thanks. And then I've got friends who know that this is a pet peeve of mine, and like all friends, what do? You poke them, So Nick Dogras set up a protocol. They call it the Gunkelman protocol. I don't even have an idea what it is, other than something to irritate me, Anyway, he's an old friend, and that's what you do with old friends. You joke around.
Reach out to him to come on and say, "Hey, we were talking about the Gunkel wave. What is it?"
Gunkelman protocol.
Gunkelman protocol. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can ask him. Other than just being a joke, I don't know what it is.
Well, we're going to find out, Jay. Jay, you have a great weekend. Great show, buddy.
Have a great day. It's good to see you.
Say hi to Renita.
Catch you later, my friend.
And Sky, bye. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.